Guys, it's a great honor. It's a great honor and privilege to introduce you again to. Let me just get my nicotine pouch out. I should have brought something to drink. Something non-alcoholic to drink because I'm off the juice. Anyways, I'm on the wagon, as they say. But I'm not, or is it off though? That's like from some sort of sitcom or something. Anyways, it's another Hobo Smokecast. It's another Hobo Smokecast. And today, we gotta dive into some heavy topics here. We gotta dive into some real heavy subject matter. Alright? Are you ready for that, dear viewer? Are you ready to smoke Paramount Red in the standard packaging I bought at the supermarket here in the beautiful country of Norway? I'm going to smoke it in the woods, and it just rained. So, and look, I'm keeping my litter in my pocket, so we keep the forest nice and clean. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with the cigarette butt, but I'll deal with that later. I'll deal with the guilty conscience later, I said in the pirate voice, so that you will listen. No, I'll figure something out. Paramount Red, here we go. Let's light it up. Guys, there's been a lot of talk back and forth, and it feels like, philosophically, as a world, we're reaching a precipice. We're reaching a point where it almost becomes impossible to think of a continuation, an advancement. Now you might be saying to yourself, this has actually been on repeat in public discourse since like the 60s. Maybe even further if you think about apocalyptic thinking being integrated into the worldviews, the heuristics of how mankind interprets the world throughout the ages, the eons. But nevertheless, it feels like we're at a precipice because we are now approaching an age where it becomes harder and harder for anything to happen at all. People are talking about an imminent economic crash, but a total economic crash is at this point somewhat made impossible by the kind of... There's people over there. There's people over there. God. By the kind of virtual impossibility, the total safety mechanisms of digitalized life, which is spreading like a wildfire, which I am not causing today because the forest is soaking wet, and I am present in the moment because of my sobriety, which is also relevant to the theme of this video, which is present being radically in the moment. You could think of Terence McKenna's moment. You could think of the philosophical idea of infinite regress as depicted in various forms through philosophy and mythology, and also simply theoretical musings, even physics. And this is what I'm trying to express in this video and the coming videos. It's a philosophical framework for the development of fission energy. That is the only way forward. That is how we reach Star Trek, because we can't really turn back. Okay, you can wallow in poetry and avant-garde and punk aesthetics, breaking the barriers, so to speak, taking the walls, and rebel yourself all the way to some sort of, this time it's definitely gonna work, neo hippie tribalism, or some sort of combination of colors that hasn't really been tried before, the way of the commune, etc., etc., all of which lacking the political punching force to reach the common man, if I may use an arrogant term, as is my prerogative as a philosopher by profession. And I'm not intending to hurt people by using such vocabulary, but I do understand if people will be hurt by me using such vocabulary, and they're welcome to fire back because I have thick skin. By the way, this is an incredibly tasty smoke for its price, and I don't think it was conveyed what was on my lighter, which I used to light it up. We might have time for several smokes in this. But look, it's a cute doggy, a golden retriever. Smooth smoke. So where's my exit point? How do I get the perfect line of reasoning that was coursing through my head as I was walking to this location, this fine location, to exit through my mouth without the use of alcohol as a lubricant to build brick by brick a very imprecise leaning tower, if you will, that ultimately misses the point, but successfully manages to convey a sort of, well, at least we can deal with it next week type of energy. You know, now, as I'm in this stage of my life, you know, philosophical reasoning becomes excruciating once you employ laser-like precision. And you know, I've recently started speaking to the AI more, which isn't really frightening as some of these people say. I think you underestimate the power of visual intelligence to be facetious in itself. And so the fact that AI is capable of stroking your ego to the point where it feels like you almost have company really is completely natürlich for the intention of such an invention. Computer, how many parsecs are we from the Sombrero Galaxy? Would you like me to see, etc.? Alright, the objectified presence. The present being of the Mephistopheles, of the helping spirit, that I suppose always gets paid in the end. Or is it just you talking to yourself in a mirror, such as I am doing now? The reason why I digress into these semi-theatrical little segues is because philosophical reasoning as it approaches the present age, especially the intra-war and post-war works, become increasingly obscure in their attempts to technify natural language to describe present being. Of course, many times I've alluded to Heidegger previously because I think philosophy is interesting to read nevertheless, and that Dasein impacts the conflicts of our age much more than we give it credit for, because it is intuitively understood by many more people than just people who have read Heidegger or are interested in philosophy as a vocation at all. Which isn't, well, I mean, who has time for apologies? You know, somebody's got to be at work in the morning. But to induce present being in another individual to share a moment is perhaps, you know, would be relatable through some, I think you're like Spinoza perhaps. It's often done more efficiently through a sort of poetic artistic expression. Hence the schism within, you could call it futurist political movements. You know, where do we go now? Are we forever here, trapped in the panopticon? How do we break down the glass walls of the seeming all-perforating observation, of the all-perforating self-awareness trapping us in inertia, thus not only on the top side eliminating risk, but on the downside eliminating anything to become anything at all. And so we must ask ourselves, employing the philosophical dyad of being and becoming. And much of this is expanded upon on my channel Toby222. There's already tons of videos there, my 12 Rules for Life series, and other video essays or video rants, if you want to call them that continue to embroider on this. And you know, like trees in the forest, there's one that's fallen over. That one's relatively young compared to that one. That's a birch, that's a, you know, etc., etc. They're in growing processes. They are their processes, but they are also their sort of platonic form, if you will. Seeing the forest for the trees, and if a tree falls in the woods and nobody's there, did it really happen? I know I'm just shooting up stuff now, because the self-consciousness is getting to me as well, because I'm looking into a camera. But this still must be done, because as a result, the way that art and science have interacted is that art creates the soulful architecture of how we are to conduct science in a way that we can breach new horizons, such as with the dawn of nuclear energy, such as with the invention of the wheel, etc., etc. All, of course, heuristics that are trapped in natural language. Just as the energy of the sun is trapped in the process of fission, which is, as far as I understand physics, similar to fusion, but entirely different as well. Much like female and male, perhaps. And this is why it becomes more important to explore the schism between elitism and abrasivism. The difference between artistically breaking down. Abrasivism is not really the transgressism. The difference between, can we construct a philosophical system that, if not approaching Platonic perfection, allows us to overcome the inertia of the event horizon of time? Or is the only remedy against the inertia of time transgression, so that we may deconstruct for the conditions of such a construction to be possible at all? Now, both of these positions become self-undermining. The constructivist angle becomes self-undermining, as a Tower of Babel. And the transgressionist, well, what is he transgressing into? What would be a good metaphor for that? Well, at least that gives us something to think about, which is better than nothing, which I explained in one of my shorts, which I'll probably make another short to promote this video and the upcoming videos, which will create this framework, and I'm putting it out for free on YouTube. You know, I guess I'm never going to be a rich man, but if this gets out there, then it'll all be worth it, or something. All right, Elon Musk. And so, using the being becoming dyad to get to fission. So, the existential qualifier used in physics is mass. Mass pertaining to a substance. Thus, it creates the backdrop against which the modern ideologies of, for instance, atheism become tenable, at least within the framework of dialectics. And the reason why I brought up the tree falling in the woods metaphor earlier is that even though this heuristic may seem sufficient in a dialectic perspective, it has proven itself to have limitations, and that there is an event horizon to the future within the natural sciences as well. And this has been corroborated by many scientists as far as I know, but I don't have an office and tons of books and stuff in it, so I haven't been able to do the rigorous work that maybe some of the viewers have done to corroborate this. But you know, like, much empiricism turns out to be false when tried to be reproduced. Studies or calculations, etc., and the mystery of quantum mechanics. And you know, as far as quantum mechanics goes, my cursory knowledge of that is that you have particles that abandon previously predicted patterns of motion basing itself on the 360-degree rotational thing, and you have stuff like 720 and stuff, and like, you know, pendulums within pendulums and all of that. All right, I'm using natural language here because I'm doing philosophy. I'm not the egghead that's going to be making the equation, but I'd love to help. I'd love to help. All right. Shit, gotta get out of my thoughts. Gotta get out of my thoughts. Yeah. So, my cursory knowledge of quantum physics is that a problem is that particles tend to behave differently when observed. Now, using my philosophical scalpel here, this means that even though the axiom for physical mechanism is that the existential qualifier for any given substance is mass, the natural language interpretation of this knowledge, which I suppose has mass in the weight of the paper it's written on, or the gigabytes it's stored on. Norwegian accent, but but it assumes that perception has mass. It passes over the observation of the observer, which I think is not necessarily an original idea here as it's presented within my framework of Torbjornism. Please name it Torbjornism or something. Or maybe, with a dash Torbjornist Muskism or something. Oh, stop it, Nobel Committee. Now where was I going? Right, so it hints to the fact that trees may be doing all kinds of stuff when we're not in the woods and hearing them. Even within the framework of established science, that doesn't necessarily need to appeal to the will of God or the unmoved mover, even though those are very persuasive arguments within the framework of dialectical discourse. And many scientists have this worldview. But I'm not. We can leave the gods for another video or something. I'm sitting on a rock. Moving through space-time in 1,000,000 light years an hour. Anyways, so that means that any substance is in a transitionary phase. That means to be in time. Thrownness and Dasein, concepts employed by Heidegger, which are necessarily, because of the limitations of natural language, deemed as philosophically obscure, due to philosophy necessarily needing to be very rigorous before it becomes adopted as truisms. I'm all for that. Just as I'm all for sensible regulation of financial transactions online. But that begs an interesting question, which is that if we use, I guess it would be algebra, and you could say that x is being and y is becoming, and then you could have some sort of qualifier to represent eternity, and another qualifier representing finity or transience, and you could say that being is eternal becoming, and becoming is transient being, which means that you can have something be something else. And so male and female, plus and minus, on the magnet, which creates electricity as far as I know, and which is why gold is not only intuitively perceived as highly important, but also scientifically in our modern sciences, and why it's used to very often allude to the sun and allude to energy, allude to inspiration, allude to why we do anything at all. Why do we manifest this world? Why do we not merely sit like Narcissus and stare into the pond until we run out of beauty? Or just gather nuts and sleep? Why do we write symphonies and smell our own farts? Just to give examples of the many things you can do with the time you have here on Earth. But why? Why even get out of bed in the morning? You might say it's a silly question to pose like this, but that's a question a lot of people are fucking struggling to. Damn it, I said it. Now the algorithm's gonna sync this. Struggling to answer. To a much larger extent than you'd think. And this is why we need fission energy. This is why we need fission energy, and the way that it shall be accomplished is through AI and fusion energy. No, wait. Fusion was what I was looking for. Yeah, no, we have to get to fission before we get to fusion. Right. Yes, because then if being is becoming and becoming is being, why are they separate concepts? Fusion energy. Relating it back to the political movement that has to happen for the panopticon not to close forever and the world not ending, not with a bang but with a whimper, with us simply losing the ability to move at all due to everything being put into a giant calculator, perhaps displaying the number 42. We have to reconcile the based conservatives destroying activists with facts and logic, with activists breaking down the constraints and barriers of bourgeois monotony and the death of meaning altogether through transgression. They have to be unified. This is the impossible mission, not of fission but of fusion. And what rhymes with fusion? Illusion. So do we need to sell another dream? If fission is a mission and fusion is a delusion, then, you know, the truth may be Rosicrucian or just another subterfusion. If truth is a lie, then all lies must be facts to a degree. Every thing is made up of acts, every play, every pause, every stop. You gotta suffer if you wanna reach the top. Speaking of stop, now I think it's time I stop rapping and start wrapping it up before the mic drop, or before I fuck it up. Fission. Why did I make this mistake of calling it fission when I thought about it, the fusion? Because that's what they said, you know. If you want to reach Elon Musk's post-scarcity system, then we must become lords of the energy that creates the stars, the sun. And I think that can be done if we adequately have a philosophical framework. And free AI can do this now. Free AI on Google can do this now. It can do philosophy quite seamlessly. Not without the input of a philosopher. It still remains obviously tool-like to me, which is frustrating because a lot of my time is spent in a sort of solitude. But enough about me, you know. Would you date me? Anyways. No, but really. I'm gonna be doing some dating videos later. What to do on the first date. How not to fart on the first date. How to clear your system of farts before you go to the fancy restaurant. Order the risotto or something. If you got the money for it. But what I was saying. So fusion, you gotta get helium to get so collided that it melts into each other. And that means you have to appeal to that third pole, that unseen pole. And that's why My breakthrough revelation is that we must find an E equals mc squared for perception itself. Okay, you must treat your vision like it is laser beams, like X-Man guy shooting out of your face from a mystical center, which is the fusion reaction. That is your consciousness. And I believe we can theorize our way there, but it will involve necessarily, as above so below, the fusion of calculating wisdom with artistic wisdom, just like the physicists talk about the sense of childlike play, or that transgressionists would talk about, turning philosophy against itself, using its own logic to create the boundaries of how far a given heuristic can take you, and then battling with the nihilism that ensues from said intellectual task. And so it becomes like taking on two really, really intense full-time jobs at the same time, really. Maybe enough to schism your brain. But it must be done. And, I can only do so much, alright? I haven't read all the book on physics. And there are still going to be the forces of good and evil in this world, yeah. And we're going to be talking about that later as well, if we find a good angle about it. And, infinite regress, apps within apps, 2FA verifications within 2FA verifications within know your customer policies and biometrics, and regulatory agencies within regulatory agencies, and, bureaucratic drift, mission creep, and the devaluation of the currency. We need to make this shit happen. And so I think we can build a ladder up there from oil and gold to fission and AI to eventually fusion, the great gig in the sky, to become masters of the power of the sun. But if we describe it as an end state, as the absolvement of all struggle, then we will have simply arrived at our starting point once again. And so, insofar as fusion rhymes with illusion, I suppose we must imagine Sisyphus happy. Can you do that? If you've not drank so much that you've almost killed your liver, it's Saturday. Have one beer. Please. Please. And if you really need to, Google how to give your wife an orgasm. And then on Monday we can get cracking on this thing, yeah? I'll take stock options in return. However many you feel like giving me. Anyways, if you're watching, have a smoke, think about these things. What do you know about physics that might link into this? What do you know about philosophy? How can we make Dasein into an equation? Can we get any physics masterminds to fully understand Heidegger, and philosophy masterminds to fully understand physics, and then meet each other like two miners meeting each other under no man's land? Two sappers digging through the earth just to find each other. Two hearts beating as one. Two suns, as above, so below. Remember that. The eclipse has already happened. We're entering a new age. Alright, keep your heart 3 stacks. I'm gonna listen to some music now.